more well accepted in the community in the process. We can certainly make our children safer if we were to abandon the prohibition model, which we know gives rise to violence, and turn things around. But he wrote this really nasty letter. And then because it did not get published in the Washington Post, the drug czar intervened. The drug czar is Gil Kurlikowski. He's the head of the Office of National Drug Control Policy. He's my successor as the police chief in Seattle.
So you know him well?
I know him quite well.
Yeah.
And he writes a letter to the Post saying, in effect, how could you not print the letter from the IACP president? Mm-hmm. And so now the battle is engaged. We're not going to let this ride. If that letter appears in the paper, you can bet that LEAP is going to respond with a position paper or another op-ed piece, and is in fact going to say, you are behaving in really unconscionable ways by labeling police officers as uncaring about the health and safety of their brothers and sisters in law enforcement. We care deeply about the safety of police officers. We care deeply about the safety and health of our children. So if you want to engage in debate, would be the message of this piece. If you want to engage in debate, let's have at it. But labeling somebody as callous or as insensitive or reckless in protecting the safety of cops and kids, that's not fair.
Totally. And
it's just not fair.
Because there's this whole wall, like you're saying, of people of vested interests.
Right.
As far as like taking it forward now, because I don't think it'd be so different in America and Australia, where do you see the weak points in the war on drugs argument? Where are the places to focus the opposition and try to break that open?
I think it's really valuable, useful, necessary for organizations like mine, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, to put our word out there, to encourage support, to get people to sign on with our organization at leap.cc. I think it's extremely important to build and grow our organization so that more and more people say something like this. Well, this is a bunch of cops and prison wardens and judges and DEA and FBI and Homeland Security agents saying the drug wars cause more harm than good. So that's real valuable in the spirit of returning veterans of the Vietnam War. When they spoke, people listened. Because you can debate wars, you know, till cows lay eggs, but if you get somebody who's been on the front lines of one and who, like one of our newscasters, most trusted man in America, Walter Cronkite, goes to Vietnam and comes back and says, I have reported this war from the comfort of my studio. Now I want you to see some footage. And it's of Uncle Wally, Walter Cronkite in a military helmet with his horn-rimmed glasses and his little mustache. And he is embedded, if you will, with the troops. And he comes back and says, this is an unwinnable war. We're so pleased that well before his death, he was able to say the same thing about the drug war and sign on as a supporter of Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. That's how it happens, I think. It's just more and more people spread the word.
Is there any evidence that any of the mainstream media is any way open to any of this? Or
I'm disappointed and disturbed by major reputable old media publications like the Washington Post, this one example being an exception, and the New York Times parroting the language of the prosecutors of the drug war. It's like, come on, you usually use more insight, more intelligence, more reporting to come to your conclusions. And I think once again we have generations of people who've grown up, being influenced by the vocabulary of the drug war.
But the evidence, it's just so overwhelming. I mean, I don't understand how you can be why is, for example, the Republicans are still so supportive of just the huge cost that you need to keep prosecuting the war on drugs, when they're the ones that are supposed to be about small government, government outside of the bedroom? There's a real conflicting rhetoric, isn't there?
I spoke to a think tank, and several people self-identified as what would be a Republican if they were in the States. Many of them are libertarians, and they're already on board with the necessity of drug policy reform. So that's preaching to the choir. But we have in our country many conservatives who are now signing on with us. Some of them are police officers. If I got into a conversation with a fellow member of LEAP about a variety of social issues that had nothing to do with drugs, we might be poles apart on those issues. But there are a lot of conservatives who are actually, in some cases, leading the argument. And for precisely the reasons you're talking about.
And also there
small
are religious
government.
organisations that are coming out further in support of getting...
We are, I'm so pleased that we have many representatives of the faith community. And not necessarily those identified as progressive in my country, who are in fact signing on. And they're looking at the human suffering associated with the drug war. And it's like, oh my God, that's what I understood religions to be about.
Well, there's
So
a big
it's
swing to
nice.
the Republicans, to the Democrats, sorry, in a lot of the southern states. I met a pastor in Jackson,
Yes.
and he was saying a lot of his flock, the young kids, they're sick of the fire and brimstone, and they see Obama as a guy to vote for because of his social activism.
Sure.
And they said this, and I was thinking is there any attempt to connect with those church groups from your organizations and to start linking across?
We send out the word to service clubs. I don't know if they're the same in this country. I know you have chapters of Rotary, for example, or Lions or Kiwanis.
Very conservative.
Names, which is precisely why we send out, they're always looking for speakers. They got to produce a speaker every week. And they think, well, why not a controversial topic?
Yeah.
And so many of them, I was speaking to the Sausalito Rotary Club in the Bay Area a couple of
And
weeks
so,
ago.
is there a good response?
We have a wonderful response from them.
Is it people being polite, or is it really
No,
changing?
no. These are people who have been doing a lot of private questioning,
Yeah.
and they've never had a forum to really discuss it. They don't want to be seen as permissive parents, so they're not going to talk about their doubts about the drug war necessarily with their kids. But when they're with fellow Rotarians, business people typically, and oftentimes on the conservative side of the political continuum, and they get a cop who comes in and lays it out, it's like, oh my God, yeah, I never thought about that. And so we have lots of people coming out of those service clubs. And personally, we don't want to go, every once in a while we do, we don't want to go into forums where people are already on our side. We want to go into forums where people are
Who
not.
do you think which will be the last group to fall in American society? What's the toughest nut to crack in your view?
I think the toughest nut to crack will be the prison industrial complex, and particularly those, but not exclusively those, who are in it for profit. You literally get paid per prisoner per day. Now, why would you want to see that revenue stream
But it's
reduced?
morally indefensible to own
You and I
a
agree
system.
with that, but you asked
course,
me,
if you're a little
who's going to
lecture in,
resist it?
yeah.
Who's going to resist it? You know damn well that the people who are going to resist it are those who see the infliction of the deepest wound. It is their identity. It is who they. It's not just what they do. It is who they are. So that represents, not to get too psychological, that represents a narcissistic wound. But it also
this
represents lost revenue. So those
Particularly in
people
the
are going to
private
fight it.
system, or is it also
Well,
in the public?
let's talk about the public system. I fought my police union virtually every day of my 6-year career as a saddle police chief. We agreed on many things, we disagreed on some, but there was always, always, always a fight over what's called a body of work. So public unions in law enforcement, in corrections, have a stake in maintaining their membership. So if I, through drug policy reform, come in and say, we're going to take away 300,000 of your inmates, which, by the way, equates to, I'm just being totally hypothetical, it relates to a loss of 700 of your correctional officers. That's not just 700 public employees, that's 700 members of a labor union. So when we ignore labor in this conversation, we do so at our own peril. We've got to find a way to make them whole, to make them understand that it is true that you could lose membership. You don't want to fire anybody, be my personal belief, and I'm not, it's just a strong labor orientation that I have. You want people to keep their jobs if you can make that possible. In police work, it's much easier, because I think police officers are being misspent today. I don't think there are too many of them. I personally think in most cities there aren't enough of them.